I'm going to share my screen. There we go. Welcome, everyone. I'm really looking forward to being with you all. And today we're going to really think about integrating some group coaching and team coaching into your organization. So let's get started. A little bit about me, and I noticed that the most important picture is missing. So I'm going to click and hopefully it will appear. Yes, here he is. Professor, the awesome dog. That's the most important part of my life at the moment. He's 13 years old and such a joy and such an old guy, but I love him. And I am a surfer, adventurer. That's what I love doing outside of work time. And if I'm not playing, I usually am coaching or I am training coaches to do group coaching. So in terms of my own coaching, I am a ICF International Coach Federation certified. I also am trained by the Neuro Leadership Institute in brain-based coaching. And I do a lot of work. This little thing here is probably my favorite thing to do. I'm a certified Lego serious play facilitator and coach, meaning that I use Lego in my coaching and facilitating. It's so fun and brings out so much creativity and so much in people that they wouldn't know even existed. So that's a little bit about me. Let's move into our session. I'm the co-founder of Group Coaching HQ. We mostly train coaches in group coaching. So I'm not going to go over that too much, but our agenda for today. I want to really differentiate between group and team coaching. Very important distinction, and I'll talk about those a little more in a sec. I want to make the case for group coaching within an organization, especially when we're thinking about leadership development. I want to share some key considerations if you decide that you want to build group coaching or team coaching into your organization. I'll share the elements of a cohesive coaching cohort and what we can think about when we think about systemic team coaching. Second half, as Jocelyn said, we'll have some Q&A time. Having said that, if any questions come up while I'm presenting, feel free to put them in the chat. And if I feel that it's the right time to answer for those who are not present with us, then they'll get that answer as well. So I might answer on the fly here. All right, let's dive in. Let's think about teams versus group coaching. When we're thinking about teams, we're really thinking about a specific type of group. So this is a group in which all members are working together and they're working towards a common goal. So they are interdependent on each other to achieve that goal. Through coaching, they consider different ways to work together, to think about different relationships, to think about how to move forward to achieve the team's goals that have been agreed on. And the coaching really helps to accelerate the team's performance. It contributes to a healthy culture of collaboration. It contributes to helping the team expand their thinking beyond just what they're doing day to day. The team coach usually looks at the team as an entity. So meaning that if we think about a client, when I'm team coaching, the client is the team. It's not an individual on the team. It's the group of people who form that team. And so while the actions that the team chooses to focus on might call on individuals' strengths, they are ultimately connected to the team's goal. So a quick example might be I worked with the marketing team at a startup, and the marketing team included the CMO, the EVP, the VP of marketing, and 3 members of the marketing team. And so they were all working towards the common goal together. Moving to group coaching, which is my sweet spot. I'm not going to lie, that's my favorite thing to do. Here we're really bringing together a group of individuals who are working towards their own goal, and usually they share an interest or a challenge. So a good example might be I currently coach groups of first-time managers. So they all work for the same very large financial organization, and they don't know each other outside of our group. So they come together because they're all first-time people leaders in their organization. The beauty of group coaching is that usually I mentioned they share an interest or a challenge. And so they benefit from each other's wisdom, each other's stories. And as a group coach, my role is really to ensure that each member is receiving value from the coaching, because we co-create a really safe environment. Psychological safety is really important both in team and group coaching, to be fair. But all members really can evolve within that group towards their own individual goal. The coach usually encourages a lot of peer coaching, so members get curious with each other. They end up learning coaching skills to support each other, and they set their own individual goals and actions. So that's where it's really important that the team coach is able to ensure that all participants are catered for and all participants are growing. So I wanted to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what these two are, because the skills that are needed for each one are very different. So I'll focus a little bit on both, but I'll focus a little more on group coaching for today's session. Why group coaching? So when we're thinking about, and this is valid for team coaching too, there's a ton of data out there, a ton of research that shows that organizations that have a coaching culture show incredible benefits. There's a benefit around retention, around the way that people connect, in the leadership styles. There's an increase in flexibility for a lot of leaders. So there's no doubt coaching is such a good thing to have in an organization. Two main issues. One is external coaching is really expensive. I mean, it's really hard to make coaching accessible to all coaches, to all employees, I mean. And often what we're seeing these days is that a lot of very larger organizations are actually creating their own coach training programs. So they're coaching leaders to become coaches, or training leaders to become coaches within the organization, so that they don't have to go external. The problem with that continues to be that these coaches are one-on-one coaches. And three problems that we've seen with that. One is that coaches tend to lack the bandwidth to respond to internal demand. So a lot of times coaches just don't have the space to coach everyone who needs it. With group coaching, you're really maximizing both financial and time resources. So you're impacting more people in your organization. One-on-one coaching usually is reserved for top leadership because it's so expensive. And with group coaching, what I love is that I go into organizations and it makes coaching accessible for individual contributors, emerging leaders. And what we're seeing is that in organizations that have group coaching programs, I work with a couple of smaller organizations that decided to have group coaching programs. The coaching culture really permeates throughout the organization, which is beautiful. So in the groups, employees tend to practice coaching skills. That means that they can actually get out of their group and practice those skills, like deep listening, asking powerful questions, mirroring, so their communication gets so much better than it would be without being in that coaching group. And the last thing is, and I know that many of us are feeling that connection. A lot of people, we're doing this virtually, and it's wonderful, and we're also losing so much of the connection that can happen in organizations through being hybrid or remote or whatever model we have that doesn't bring people together. And what we found with group coaching is that it's really incredible because it brings people together who wouldn't normally be together. Like I mentioned, this group I've been coaching, it increases empathy because suddenly they get to understand what other people are doing, how other people do things, increases engagement. And it also allows them to see the bigger business picture because suddenly they're understanding what others are doing. With team coaching, we can really think about these in a very similar way. Coaching tends to create a ton of connection. One coach is working with a whole team. So once again, we're really maximizing the impact of the coaching. Um, and where we can bring into the team people who are at different hierarchical levels. So you might have, as I mentioned, you might have the CMO together with someone who's maybe a director level, for example, or an individual contributor, in fact. So both 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 of these um, uh, losing the word methodologies are really super helpful in bringing people together and in amplifying the impact of coaching. One of the things that I love about group coaching again is this one group that was that's the new people manager. One of the examples that I love giving is that emotional flexibility was really hard for them for the first time, and they had to give performance reviews for the very first time, and they're mostly on the sort of late 20s age group, and they had to be clear and they had to be kind and they had to set expectations. And individually, when they were isolated, we talked about what was the most difficult for them, and they all said it was being emotionally flexible, being able to adapt. We talked through what that would mean for them to show up in a way that was transparent and yet would support the direct reports growth, versus being the nice person. And the connection was incredible. Suddenly they realized, wow, first of all, I'm not the only person who's going through this, and who's finding it hard to do that. And because they came together, they left with a ton of ideas. The next session, we had a couple of people who had their first performance reviews, and they shared out that it was so much easier because we talked about it in the group. And one of them actually said that he called onto another participant in the group that he didn't know before we started coaching, and they brainstormed together. So lots of amazing impact that can happen. And I keep giving this example of first time people managers, but really it could be bringing people together who are at different levels of leadership, could be bringing people together who are part of an underrepresented group, for example. So lots of different options here. If you're thinking about bringing a group coaching practice into your organization, or if you're thinking about bringing team coaching, in fact, a couple of things to think about. One, curate the groups really intentionally. What that means is making sure that if it's group coaching, the participants are connected through a shared context or challenge or career level, identity, whatever that may be. If we're thinking about team coaching, you want to make sure that you have conversations with the team leaders and the way they're going to show up in the team coaching situation. So you want to make sure that everybody understands what the experience is going to be about and how to show up in it. You want to make sure if it's group coaching that you're bringing together people who are engaged, people who will actually commit and show up, because there's nothing worse in a group than having a first session and then the next session 3 people are missing because whatever. They need to be committed so that the group can start to create cohesion. A couple of things that we want to avoid. One is if we're doing group coaching, so this time really focusing on individual goals, Then we want to avoid putting employees together who work directly on the same team or people who might be in competition. Just because we want to make sure, and I'll talk about cohesion in a second. The next thing that we want to think about is when we're creating groups, avoiding having people where one person stands out as an only. I was the head of coaching for a startup where we would have hundreds of groups. And we learned very quickly when someone felt like an only, and sometimes, we immediately think, oh, the only person of color or the only person with a certain gender identity. We had one group where one person only was a parent. And it was really hard for her because no one else really got what she was dealing with in terms of work-life balance because she had so many things to think about at home. So we want to be really conscious of who we're bringing together and how we're bringing people together. Once we have our amazing group, I want to share my next slide is really about what we've seen be the most impactful elements to create cohesion in a group. And if you, as a group coach or as someone who is bringing a group together, you don't even have to be coaching, right? But sometimes as a people leader, you bring your team together. Here are some elements that absolutely create cohesion. The first one at the center, you'll notice, is trust. And I want to quickly differentiate between trust and psychological safety. Trust happens usually between two people. So we want to think about building trust between two group members, building trust between one participant and the coach or the person who's leading the group. And because that trust is being built in smaller groups, we start to build psychological safety together as a whole group. Psychological safety being really a space where everyone feels vulnerable or rather safe to take risk. I think Amy Edmondson says that it's a space where she talks about teams where the team feels safe for interpersonal risk. So that would be the definition of psychological safety as we think about it. So that's always at the center of everything, trust and psychological safety. So everything else we do is really geared towards building that trust because everything else that's around it will come from the fact that there is or isn't trust and psychological safety in the group. So what might we do? And if you're a team leader, you're not a coach, this is something that you can do, is co-create agreements together with the group. So as a group coach, my first thing is always, let's decide how we want to be together in this group. Confidentiality is always number one. Things that I like to include are assuming positive intent, ensuring that we're all respectful of each other. And then I'll open it up. I'll ask people to add in what's been really powerful for you in a group as an agreement, or what has been disruptive for you in a group that you'd like to turn into an agreement for this group. So really pull from people's experiences. That's always the most impactful way to co-create these agreements. Once those have been created and the group starts to build that trust, build that psychological safety, this is when we start seeing all those things happen. So thinking about insight is when really through conversations, through questioning, because coaching is really all about asking great questions, whether it's from the coach or from the other participants, members start to deepen their own self-awareness, their connection to self, and their connections to others. Inspiration, we're really thinking here about sharing stories. One of the most beautiful things about groups is that everybody comes in with different experiences, different ways of seeing the world, And so they can really inspire each other. They can support, they can, sometimes just by hearing something that someone went through, we realize that, hey, I've come such a long way. I went through that. I've come such a long way. Or, hey, I relate to this. This really resonates with me. I am going through the same thing right now. Let's work this out together. So inspiration is a big part of it. One of the most amazing thing that I see in group coaching is support for each other. So one thing that I always encourage my participants to do, and again, if you're a team leader, this is something you can do, is to notice each other's strengths. So when someone shares a story, I might pause them and say, hey, Jocelyn shared this story. What strengths did you notice she exhibited when this happened? And then that's something that will stay throughout the group. As the group evolves, they will pull from that. And someone, at one point might say, hey, Jocelyn, I know that you're super resilient because of that story you told. So how can you pull from that in this particular challenge you're facing? So the support comes from getting to know each other, listening to each other, and they mirror each other, they cheer each other. In psychological safety, we have different levels, and there's a great book by Timothy Clark that talks about the different levels of psychological safety. And the top level is challenger safety. This is where the group or the team feels safe to challenge each other. And I love seeing that in a group because this is where they expand each other's perspective. This is where they can start to really take risks for feedback, for example. So I remember this one group where I was coaching, and this one person said, I never want to do this job again. I'm leaving this and I'm going to do something else. And da, 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 da. And she did, left the job. So I never want to do this again. And then got a job offer for the same role and in a different company. And the group actually called her out on it. And this is what you said, that you never wanted to do this again. So what's happening here? And it allowed her to take a step back and reflect and think about, okay, I know why I'm attracted to this position. It's because of status. It would be it would be a great company to work for, etc. And she actually decided not to go for it. And so she might have decided to go for it. The outcome doesn't matter. What mattered was that there was enough safety in the group to challenge her and help her get perspective on where she was. The curiosity piece, again, I encourage you to use in any way, in any time you're in a group situation. Asking questions makes people feel valued. It makes people feel validated. It also allows us to learn more simply to listen. We can start to investigate, or rather excavate possibilities. We can start to really think about what ways we might expand. So curiosity is super important, and we always try in coaching to stay away from giving advice. So I always encourage my participants, instead of telling people what to do, ask them what they might want to do or what they've already tried. So showing curiosity is a much better way to help people reflect than telling them what to do. And the final piece is movement. We want to make sure that there's always a feeling of growth, that people are moving towards their goals based on all the mindset shifts that have been facilitated by their peers, by the coach, by their challenges, their aspirations. But we want to make sure in coaching that there is movement and that we're seeing growth. So what I tend to do is pause the group and ask them to reflect. What are you taking away for yourself? What are you learning? And what's something that you'd like to do about this learning? And grab a sip of water. It's a lot of talking. So moving on, and I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to keep moving fast. When we're thinking about coaching teams, what we're often thinking about are these areas. So things that we might coach are focused more on task, processes, connections, the whole organization and all stakeholders. So you can see how the group coaching piece is really about connecting different individuals, whereas the team coaching is much more about the system that they're a part of. So it really enables the team to reframe, to enhance the way that they relate, and the way that the team serves its business environment, which often means placing emphasis on how it leads change with its stakeholders, whether it's employees or customers, how it functions internally. So rather than just focusing on the team's internal relationships, in systemic coaching, we're really thinking about building the collective leadership of the team, helping them to co-create value with everyone involved. So I'm not going to talk too much about this here, because a lot of what I shared in the previous slide here also applies to team coaching. All right. What can we do? What can you do to integrate some of these areas into your teams at your level? Co-creating agreements, I mentioned earlier, this is super important. Decide how you collaborate as a group or as a team. Bring your people in. This is not about you as a team leader telling people. It's really about that co-creation. What would make us feel like we're working together and that we are able to provide the best value? Always be contracting. What that means in coaching terms is we're always asking for permission. Remember, we're talking about coaching, right? So we're not necessarily talking about giving tough feedback or having difficult conversations. We're really thinking about enhancing the thinking process. So here we want to make sure that we're always creating trust and creating psychological safety for the whole group, whether it's a team or a group of individuals coming together. Curiosity. There's a great, and I don't have it on these slides, but there's a great framework called the ask-tell spectrum. So really thinking about asking questions versus telling. And then finally, exploring together. So how do we make sure that if we're discussing a concept, that concept is understood in the same way by everyone? In a team, once again, we talked about how everyone is coming in with their own understanding of the world, their own way of seeing how or of perceiving the world. So ensuring that we're establishing common vocabulary is going to be really important. How do we invite people to set intentions for themselves so that they continue to grow, not only when we're focused on performance evaluation, but perhaps at the end of a meeting, or at the beginning of a meeting? Hey, what do we want to get by the end of this meeting? And as an individual, what would be most helpful for you here? And we want to always listen. Last but not least, what does each person in the group or in the team take away, and what will they commit to? That's that movement piece I was talking about. So those are just a few practices that you can integrate from group coaching and team coaching into your own practice as a leader, or if you decide to implement group or team coaching in your organizations. I have here on this, we just put together this ebook. I'm going to say it myself, it's pretty good, which is a step-by-step guide to creating coaching groups in organizations. And I'm going to put the slides in the chat for those of you who are here, and for those of you who are watching or the recording, then Marissa or Jocelyn will share those slides. We have a huddle. We have a group coaching festival coming up in October. Feel free to join us. We'd love to see you there. And if you're interested in learning more about any group coaching training or programs, feel free to use these codes. Again, these two are links in the slides, so you'll be able to take a look at those. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you all so much for listening. That was a lot of talking.
Thank you so much, Dom. That was great. Yes. Take a nice big sip of water. And we would love to hear from any of our attendees about thoughts on what Dom has presented or how you can integrate this into your work environment, any questions you may have, or things you'll be walking away with. You can either put things in the chat or you can ask directly. I'm going to hit the stop recording button now and open the floor to all of you.